Okay, good afternoon everyone. Welcome to our webinar on non-academic careers for molecular bioscientists. On behalf of the Biochemical Society in Portland Press, I'd like to welcome you all. I'm assuming you're all here, I can't actually see anyone, but welcome in space. So we're running a series of biochemistry focus webinars during the lockdown and onwards. We've got various topics in this series. We've got different research areas in the molecular biosciences. We've got practical sessions to support career development and so on. And each webinar in the series will give you an opportunity to ask questions via text. And also we welcome suggestions if you have any for future topics and future speakers to feature in our series. So if you'd like to suggest future topics, please do let us know. My name is Helen Watson. I'm Associate Professor of Bioscience Education at the University of Plymouth. I also chair the Education, Training and Public Engagement Committee here at BioChemSoc. So I've been involved with the Society for some time now, and it's a pleasure to be part of this webinar today. As molecular bioscientists, which I suspect a lot of you might be, there are a large range of career opportunities available to you after your studies or if you want to change during a career. And what we're going to do today is explore some of those. It can seem a bit overwhelming because of the number of opportunities available and the number of different fields that we can work in. You might decide to remain in education for longer and pursue undergraduate, postgraduate degrees, or you might decide to move into employment after school. Or you might decide to go back into education. There's many different careers where you can use your specialist knowledge. So what we've got today is we have 4 panelists to help us explore some of the options available outside of academia, and they're going to talk a bit about their chosen career paths. So our 4 panelists today, we have James Brown, who's a Public Engagement Project Officer in Warwick. So he's going to talk about public engagement. We have Emma Pettengale from Portland Press, who works in publishing. We have Saleha, who works in AstraZeneca, so she can talk to us about the pharmaceutical industry. And we have Neil Jones from CRUK, who can talk to us about management. And in a moment, I'll give them all a few minutes to talk about their chosen career paths. There will then be time for an extended question and answer. So if you would like to ask any questions, please type it in the questions box, and I will hopefully receive some of your questions. And also please indicate if your questions for one of the panelists in particular, please indicate that when you ask the question so I can ask the right person. So I'm going to introduce each one of our speakers now and give them a couple of minutes to talk to us a bit about what they do and how they got there. So we'll start with James Brown, who's come to us from the University of Warwick.
Yes, hello. So my career path has sort of been a bit of a bumpy one. It's taken me all over the place, but I did my undergraduate degree and a master's degree in molecular and cellular biochemistry. In the master's year of that, there was a 3-month lab-based project, which I really enjoyed, but it made me realise that a life in the lab was not for me. It was not something that I was suited to. So after finishing my master's, I went and did a PGCE, the secondary school teaching qualification, and I was a secondary school science teacher for 5 years. During that time, I also did a master's degree in education research as well, to think a little bit more deeply about pedagogy and how education works. During that period, I moved to Canada for a few years as well, started working with younger students as well. I worked in a middle school, so I worked with students down to the age of 4, and did quite a lot of hands-on family activities as well, so a little bit more informal science learning. It was a Montessori school, so it was a little bit of a different ethos to what we had here in the UK. When I returned to the UK, I then moved to Northumbria University, where I joined the physics department as an outreach officer. So straight away outside of my comfort zone in a physics department, but I got the opportunity to work with a lot of different schools around the area, working on sort of outreach activities, and again, a bit more of a move into that informal education route. But there was a really strong emphasis in that job on on sort of social justice and widening participation, sort of, increasing inclusion into sciences and into physics in particular. Following working there, I moved to the Biochemical Society, where I worked for just over 3 years as their education and public engagement manager. And again, there was a lot of work there, working with education resources, working at festivals, working with family groups, creating resources, creating activities, putting on in-person events and online events, writing for the Biochemist magazine, and so a real broad range, I think, of lots and lots of different types of sort of public engagement and science communication activities. After working at the Biochemical Society, about 2 years now, I moved to the University of Warwick, and I'm in the public engagement team there. And again, slightly outside my comfort zone, I'm now working across all the faculties, including the arts and the social sciences. And it's very much about sort of large-scale public engagement projects. So we hosted the British Science Festival, and we are looking forward to 2021 because Coventry is going to be the UK City of Culture, and the university is really keen in making sure that the research across the university is part of that celebration. So now it's about sort of working with academics, working with researchers, but perhaps more importantly, working with community groups and working with external stakeholders to sort of join the dots between the university and I guess what we might call the real world, the outside of the campus. So that's kind of my pathway and where I am at the moment.
Thanks very much, James. And now we'll move on to Emma Pettengale from Portland Press. So Emma, if you could give us a summary of what you do and where you came from. Thanks.
So started off at a very similar place to James, did a master's that included a research project and decided that as much as I loved science, the lab was not the place for me. And I decided rather than looking for specific jobs, because I really didn't know at that point what to do, I would focus on the skills that I wanted to use instead. So I really wanted to use my love of science. I really enjoyed communicating, and I'm quite particular. I have a good eye for detail is I think the tactical way of saying it. So basically I then got a job checking proofs at Biomed Central, which is an STM open access publisher. I stayed there for about 4 years working my way up, but I decided that I wasn't quite happy with just checking the content once it was all finished. I wanted to be involved in getting the content and launching the journals and developing the journals. So I then moved to the editorial team where I was responsible for launching new journals, finding out where the holes were, where the niche topics were, and that was really exciting. But then I would have to pass over my nice launched new journals once they were flourishing, and it's a bit like handing over your children. So then I moved to what is now Taylor and Francis, where I had a role as senior editor, where I was able to spend more time developing content and developing journals and developing editorial boards. And after a few years there, I moved to the Biochemical Society, where I'm currently a managing editor. And again, I get to develop the topics, I get to commission specific content. So I still have to keep a finger in every pie of the molecular biosciences to sort of understand all of the new things that are coming out. Surface level at least, and so that's really exciting because for me it means I get to continue with my broad love of science, and I get to interact with researchers every day who are doing the science without having to actually step foot in a lab. So yeah, so that's my career journey.
Thanks very much, Emma. So we've got Neil Jones from CRUK. Neil, if you could give us an introduction to what you do and your career path, that'd be brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So I guess a bit different to James and Emma, I decided to stay in the lab a little bit longer, maybe not too much more, but so did a degree in medical biochemistry at the University of Birmingham, and really chose that because I wanted to work on the relationship between biochemistry and disease, but I knew I didn't actually want to do medicine itself, so that's why I went for medical biochemistry, and then decided I actually quite liked lab work at that time, so went and did a PhD at the University of Southampton around cell signaling pathways, and then moved on to do a postdoc after that at the Institute of Cancer Research. And I guess during that postdoc, it kind of became apparent to me that I didn't particularly want to take the academic career route of moving in to try to get grants and become a group leader. So I started to look around at different options. Wasn't quite sure if I wanted to go into industry. So I moved to Cancer Research UK to the Therapeutic Discovery Labs. And we're a Cancer Research UK funded drug discovery unit. So we look very much on the therapeutic avenue of looking to develop novel medicines and things. So started in the labs there again for a couple of years, and then moved out of the labs and took up a role really where I was interfacing with academics and industrial partners, trying to pull together teams of scientists and manage them to translate the best ideas from the academic research with pharmaceutical money and pharmaceutical drug discovery and our own drug discovery at the discovery labs to really drive them forward for patient benefit. So my role now is very much managing teams of academics, drug discovery scientists at the TDL, and commercial scientists with our pharmaceutical partners, and trying to find new exciting areas of oncology that we can develop drugs against. So day-to-day stuff is very much talking to academics about their science, talking to the businesses about the finances and how we're going to run these things, talking to clinicians about how these could get into the clinic and what the patient benefit angle could be. And I guess also that role has given me a lot of interface into some of the other careers that CRUK offer outside of the lab. So obviously they have people who manage the grants that are funded, work with fundraising, work with sort of philanthropy and partnerships, so trying to bring in different funding into the charity, and also look to how we can commercialize outputs from the charity as well to deliver patient benefit. And the other aspect we interface a lot with is scientists who have gone sort of not into industry but into sort of what we call contract research organizations, which are scientists who work in the lab but actually do funded work based on sort of a company or a group paying them to deliver a certain package of work, so slightly different to perhaps industry or the roles in TDL. So if there are questions on any of those, I can also hopefully help.
Thanks very much, Neil. Do we have Saleha now?
Yes, I think so. I think
Brilliant.
we've got a problem.
Hi, over to you for an introduction, please. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, so I am my undergraduate degree at the University of York in biochemistry, and it's at that point that I had the opportunity to do some research in the lab, and that's what really got me into the life sciences and into biochemistry and where I am now. And then whilst I did that, at the same time, I also worked in a hospital lab, in a pathology lab. So I always wanted to work with patients or be close to patients. So I did that whilst I was at university, and I really, really enjoyed that. And actually, that's what kind of led me to you want to work with medicines, creating medicines, and how I ended up in industry, really. So going from that, I was still actually at that point, I was still quite unsure about what I really wanted to do, and whether it was industry, whether I wanted to be a medical doctor or something like that. So I did a master's in bioscience, still at York, but I also had the opportunity then to go outside to a CRUK laboratory in London, where I did some research there, and that was a really great experience because it was kind of not fully academic. It was a research institute, but it wasn't industry either. So I kind of got to see a little bit about working with patients and how basic biological research can then go on to influence medicine creation. And then after that, I did my PhD at the University of Leicester, and that was in collaboration with an industrial partner, so UCB Pharma, and I was working on a project that was very closely linked to something they had in the clinic at the time, and that was going through phase 3, so that was quite exciting. So at that project, ultimately, I carried on into my postdoc on that project, and so as a result of some of the work that I was doing with UCB, that target that we were working on, so that was an osteoporosis drug, has received FDA approval last year. So that was really exciting to be part of something like that early on in my career. And I also cemented the fact that I really did want to work in industry, because I got to see the industry side as part of our collaboration whilst we're being in academia. And that kind of translational research, like, was, really important to me. And then I applied for a job in AstraZeneca as a scientist still. And there I've had an opportunity to work on a plethora of different projects in early discovery. And so that's been really exciting because that's been part of Big Pharma, getting to see how they run their pipeline and getting to see all the different projects they have and getting involved with a lot of different things at different times in the pipeline as well. But mainly my role is really at the early stage where we are discovering and identifying new targets and validating them, and then trying to find leads for potential new medicines. But whilst I've been at AstraZeneca, I've had opportunities to do lots of different things. So not only as a lab-based scientist, but I've had opportunities to go into different scientific areas within the business, and also go into non-scientific roles. So I've had an opportunity to, for 9 months, to manage a large project in our communications department, which was an annual review of all the science that we do within the company. And that gave me kind of, an increased exposure to senior leaders, kind of all the top level overview of our priorities and pipeline. And it was just an exciting opportunity to get to know the organization better, especially because it is a really vast organization. And I think coming from academia, it's very, you think you know Big Pharma, but really Big Pharma is big. So yeah, so that was quite exciting. And that's where I am at the moment. So I'm not in the communications team anymore. I'm back in the lab, back doing the science. So yeah, that's me.
Thanks very much. Thanks all of you for your introductions. As you can see, we have a nice varied panel with a wealth of experience in different areas. So we have a few questions come in already. What I'll do is I'll try and get to as many questions as I can, but don't be massively offended if I don't ask yours. Because we'll have quite a few, and we'll just go through them in turn. So first of all, we've got a question for Saleha. So this is from Beth. She says, I've been a postdoc for over 10 years now, and I'm looking to move into industry. I don't want an entry-level position that doesn't reflect my extensive lab experience, but I don't have the management industry experience for the more senior roles. Where would I fit in, and what kind of level job should I be looking for? Go to Saleha.
Yeah, I think that's quite an interesting question. So, so within AstraZeneca, we have two kind of different tracks. So we have a scientific track and we have a management track. So, and then within each of those, there's equivalent levels on each of those. So you could be, you could come in with a postdoc with, like yourself with 10 years, and you could actually fit in at a higher in the higher positions in the scientific track where you are leading the science, rather than having the expectations as your role to be more managerial. So it might be those roles might be better suited for you if you still want to stay in that scientific area. And once you are within the company, it's quite as part of your development, you can, if you want to go down the management route, request to get more experience in that. I think you naturally do. Even as a postdoc, you probably have supervised students and you've supervised the PhD students. So, don't think that you don't have those skills already, as well as project management skills. So those, you probably manage your grants, you manage the research you do. So you still have those skills. So don't think that you don't have those skills, and you've got 10 years of experience in the postdoc, in a postdoc, and that those will be very much relevant to industry roles as well.
Thanks, Saleha. That's brilliant. Thanks very much. Next, we have a question from Zora, and the question's for Emma. And they ask, I have very little editorial experience. How would one attempt to break into this sector?
There are a lot of entry-level roles, is one thing that I would say. There's a lot of roles where, as long as you can show you've got the basic skill set that's needed, actual editorial experience isn't necessarily required. So a lot of these roles, you'll come in and you'll sort of learn the publishing industry from the bottom up, or from the top down, depending on how you view it. So not having a lot of experience really isn't a bad thing. It can also mean that you haven't learned any bad habits. So some publishers will even prefer you not to have experience elsewhere. So look for jobs like editorial assistant or publishing assistant, or editorial production editors, things like that. and don't similar to the last question, like you've probably got the skills just from different things that you've done. So you've probably got skills like balancing lots of different projects and deadlines and things like that. So yeah, there are lots of entry-level roles, and then most publishers, once you show aptitude for an area, will get you doing that area to the best of your ability. So yeah, I would start looking for editorial assistant or production assistant, publishing assistant, all those sorts of keywords roles, and then yeah, you can usually come up the ladder quite quickly.
Thanks, thanks Emma. We've got a question from Grace, and this is directed at James and Emma. So Grace asks, what entry points are there for molecular biologists with a PhD? Do you think that there's a benefit to having a PhD when entering a career in publishing or public engagement? So we come to James and then to Emma on that one.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think having a PhD seems to more and more be sort of the standard sort of entry point. Really. I think more and more people in public engagement have PhDs, and that's sort of where they've come from. I think I was quite lucky in that I managed to get in just before that was sort of becoming the default. So I'm probably one of the fewer people in my sort of level of role that doesn't have a PhD, to be honest. In terms of whether I think it's useful experience, I'm not entirely sure whether there's too much that you absolutely need a PhD for. I think, obviously the PhD is an incredible qualification to have for so many reasons, and you gain so many skills to it. But actually, I think for science communication and public engagement, I think, there's a lot more you pick up actually from doing those sort of voluntary roles and those volunteer roles, and writing blogs and going to festivals and events like that. So I don't think necessarily the PhD is essential at all, but it does feel like it's a bit more of a, you're coming up against a lot of people with PhDs, let me put it that way, yeah. But in terms of entry-level positions, there's an awful lot now, I think, of universities. They have more and more public engagement officers, and they tend to be sort of quite nice entry-level positions. Obviously, all the sort of the charity sectors, the learned societies, they all have entry-level public engagement positions. Again, you tend to come up with people who do quite a lot of volunteering and have done sort of a lot of events and have a bit of experience through their own sort of time and their own sort of passions and that sort of thing. So you tend to be coming up against people who've got experience doing these things. But I wouldn't let that put you off. There are definitely some good entry-level positions out there.
Thanks, James.
For publishing, I would say something similar. You're going to learn a lot of skills doing a PhD that are very transferable. The actual scientific knowledge that you learn, whether or not that's necessarily applicable or not in publishing. So for example, if you have a PhD in genetics, you may well be able to become an editor for, say, a genetics journal, and there may well be a requirement for a PhD in that field in order to do that role, because you will likely be assessing the science, so you need to have an in-depth understanding, and a PhD is a way of getting there. However, if you are more interested in the more publishing side of the role of the publishing industry, so dissemination of knowledge, talking to people, helping people get their research published, as opposed to the nitty-gritty of the methodology and the science that's going out there, which is completely it's not my particular love, but it's a brilliant love. Then a PhD in that area is definitely very useful, and a lot of the junior editors, for example, at Nature, junior editors are all required to have a PhD in or related to the subject that they want to oversee a journal in. So it's not necessarily required. For more junior publishing roles, it would certainly be a boost, but it wouldn't be required. And if you have one, you'd probably have a lot more skills to talk about. But yeah, if you're looking for a more kind of science active role, then and a PhD, if you're interested in doing one, I would say they can never help. I kind of regret not doing one now. I think it's 3 years of your life usually when you're quite happy learning and studying and studenting, so I don't see it as a hindrance at all.
Thanks, Emma. Okay, we've got a question from Amira. and the question's for Neil. So Neil, did you need additional education or training to be able to be at the interface between the stakeholders, or was it more on the job training?
It was all on the job training. Again, as the others have said, a good grounding in science knowledge, be that degree or PhD, is essential, because most of the discussions are at a science level, but the rest of it was you learn by talking to the people and sort of shadowing and mentoring through the organisation. So no, it doesn't require any additional levels of sort of management or management degree kind of things or something.
Okay, thanks, Neil. This is one to James, but I guess may apply to some of the others. It's from Valeria, who asks, when you say that you moved to jobs that were out of your comfort zone, how did you manage to do it? How difficult is it to look for jobs that don't mirror your CV in terms of experience? So James,
yeah, so to be honest, the main reason was my wife's an academic and she kept getting 2-year postdocs here, there and everywhere. So we had to move every 2 years around the country and, like I say, even to Canada. So it was kind of a necessity to find jobs, really. So a lot of the time it was just sort of seeing what was available and what was out there, and sort of taking things that were available and that I felt, I was even vaguely qualified for, an awful lot of CV writing and sending in applications. But having said that, I think having the 5 years of teaching experience was really useful for me, because actually I think that gives you an awful lot of confidence. The first time you stand up in front of a classroom of 30, 15-year-olds is kind of terrifying. So once you've done that for a few years, you kind of feel like you're quite flexible and quick thinking on your feet. So I think that made me feel a lot more confident about sort of going for things where actually it might not necessarily have been my area of expertise, but I felt I could sort of plug my way through it very comfortably.
Thanks, James. We've got one for Saleha and Neil from Irathelgi, who asks, when looking for careers in industry, how relevant is the background work that you have? Sorry, how relevant is the background work that you have done as a postdoc in academia? So meaning mainly topic-wise, how open are the hiring teams to hire someone that comes from a different field of biology? And should you only apply to positions where you're a perfect fit in terms of skills and experience? Also, I'll ask the whole lot and you can address which bits you would like to. Also, if you have done mainly postdoc bench work, how easy is it to move out of the bench work in industry to clinical trials, etc. So Saleha, do you want to start and then we'll move to Neil?
Yeah, can do. So yeah, that's a really good question. I think it depends on the role itself. I mean, if the job advertised is for a mass spec expert, then they probably will look for someone who has got that, particular expertise in that particular area. But then you could have other roles which ask you for, more general biophysics expertise, and that could, if you use those techniques in your daily work, it might not be, it might be different biology, but if it's just, techniques that they're after that you've used in your work, then that's obviously applicable to those roles. And I guess it's the same for a lot of different areas of different fields of science. But yeah, so I think it's just, having a look at what's out there and trying to find what's right for you, because they do exist. And then I think there was a second part to that question about how easy is it to move from a bench role into, what was it, sorry, Helen?
Yeah, I think it's just about how easy it is to move from a bench role to a different role, like something in clinical trials management or something different.
Yeah, so that's something actually I'm thinking of doing at the moment. And within a large pharma, I think that's I think there's a lot of opportunities that exist to do secondments outside of your area. So you're kind of taking, kind of related to the previous question, it's you taking a risk, but it's less of a risk because you do still have your old job you can go back to, but then you get to dip your toes into something completely different and try it out. And for some place like AstraZeneca, that's really big, that's easy to do. So I've been on several secondments into different areas of the business, some which are wildly different to what I'm used to, and some of them have been pretty like, I've turned up on the day and gone, I've never done this in my life, so this is going to be really scary. But actually, you have a lot of support, you've got lots of people around you who can help you, and at the end of the day, if you don't enjoy it, you can go back to your old role, and that role still exists for you. But it's worth giving it a shot. So yeah, if you do end up in a big company, there are opportunities definitely to move around, and if you enjoy it, you can make it more permanent as well.
Thanks, Saleha. Neil, did you want to add anything to that one too?
Yeah, I mean, first, completely agree. Obviously, some adverts will ask for a specific skill set, and obviously, if that's an essential skill, you'll need to have that. But often, in most roles in industry, or where we are, which is that interface between academia and industry, you're looking for people who are high quality scientists who are passionate about doing science and want to get involved, be that at the bench or elsewhere. And to address the question again on the sort of transition across, I think as the rest of the panelists have said in various answers, most people have so many transferable skills now, it's very easy to move them across into these other areas. And obviously in Cancer Research UK, again, as with AstraZeneca, it's a big organisation that runs clinical trials and runs other things, so there are always opportunities to move into those to explore. I mean, several people in my team have gone into clinical trials management, having been lab scientists within the discovery labs, and then moved into that role. Again, it's a good knowledge of science, and because they've been working in the oncology space for a bit, again, they've got some knowledge about how therapeutics work. So it's just using your knowledge and looking for the opportunities, I would say.
Thanks, Neil and Saleha for those answers. We've got one. This is for, I think, for James and Emma, from Han, who asks, I'm currently a secondary school teacher, but my main interests have always been in outreach and communication. I would be interested to explore medical writing roles and science communication roles. How would you recommend approaching these job applications without much experience, having been in teaching for a while? So if we come to James and then to Emma on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I did, going from teaching into science communication, I think is, it's a really natural fit. The experience and the skills you pick up as a teacher, are hugely relevant to all that. And, as I say, when you've got a class of 30 students, you might have to explain a concept 30 different ways to really connect to each of those individual students. So, you tend to get really good at your sort of verbal communication, you're sort of, using metaphors and analogies, simplifying concepts, all of that sort of thing, I think is really transferable. Similarly, I think with the creativity that you need as a teacher, when you're thinking about public engagement and science communication, you need that sort of that sense of fun, that sort of sense of creativity. I think that's really important as well. But I think that feels to me like a really natural progression. It's certainly what I did, and it certainly worked out well for me.
Thanks, James. Emma?
I would say if you want to get into like science communication, medical writing, things like that, the one thing you can do is a lot of scientific societies will have blogs or magazines that are quite happy to take contributions from just the community, both in terms of the science, the medical science, and just education as well. So write about what you know to start off with to get your writing style up to speed, and maybe contact some of them, and you can start to get feedback on what you're writing, so that when you do go for one of these roles, you can take your transferable skills from the classroom, and then you'll have examples of your work where you can say, well, I wrote this, this is my writing skill, or even like this is my versatility. I can write about everything from membranes all the way through to kinases or phase 3 trials, or whatever it is that you want to do. But again, I think if you focus on your skills when you go for these roles, the communication with children is very, very difficult. So if you can communicate with children, you can communicate with scientists. It's much easier.
And similar, I imagine, in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. This is a good question we have from Fatima, and it's for everyone. So what I'll do is I'll just go through you in turn. You try and maybe distill this to like one single piece of advice. So Fatima asks, if you had one piece of advice for someone who's just graduated from an undergraduate biochemistry degree, what would it be? So basically, what skills should we be building up other than lab skills? So if I start with Saleha.
Yeah, so one advice would be to keep a long-term plan, but also be prepared to run with an opportunity. I think, you know, a lot of people often, you know, find themselves in unexpected situations with opportunities in front of them. But yeah, keep hold of your long-term plan. But you know, if you find something that really excites you and you know, just go with it. You can always pause and reevaluate further down the line if it's not right for you.
Thank you. Neil, what would your advice be?
I guess two things. One, don't, as we said across the panel, don't underestimate what skills you've got and your transferable skills, and go for the opportunities that appeal for you. You know, take a few risks or a few chances. Don't assume because you've done a certain degree or got, you know, the job doesn't look quite right. Just send an application and see, because actually what people are really looking for are bright scientists, I would say.
Thank you. Emma?
I would say, yeah, just think about what you enjoy doing. What skills do you enjoy using? Do you like using communication skills? Do you like using writing skills? Do you like using analytical skills? And look for jobs that have those things very high up. But keep an open mind as to what those jobs actually do. You never know. You might find something in an industry that you'd never imagined before that is exactly the right job for you, and makes you really happy. So yeah, keep an open mind and think about what you want to do as opposed to what job you want to have.
Thank you. And James, what would your advice be?
Yeah, kind of just parroting everyone that's already spoken, really. But I think for me, you know, I got quite stressed about thinking, you know, I needed a career, I needed to have a clear path set out and know what I wanted to do. And that's not the way it's worked out at all for me. And actually, that was making me quite unhappy, thinking that I needed to find a job that I was going to stick to. So actually, I think, you know, as people have said, you know, try different things, try it out, see what works, see what sticks, see what you like. And don't worry about sort of skipping between a few different areas and doing a few different things, trying them out. And yeah, kind of do your homework as well. You know, when you're going for something, read around it, find out what it's about, find out how you can speak the lingo and speak the language about it. Because every little career and every little area has its own little special language. So, you know, do your research, do your reading, and try out a few different things.
Thanks, James. Some very sage words from everyone there, so hopefully that's helpful to you. We've got two questions which are very similar, so from Amira and from Priyanka. The gist of both of these questions directed at Saleha is essentially, how different is it doing drug discovery or research work in academia to doing it in the pharma industry?
So I think one of the main differences I found between academia and industry is in academia, you have a lot more flexibility about what you're doing. You know, you plan your experiments, you decide the direction of your research, whereas in industry, you know, you have targets, you have to meet a certain objective, and the ultimate goal is to try, for us in the industry we're in, is to create medicines. And so a lot of the targets that we work on are dictated by our therapy areas, so we don't get a choice in that. And the type of work we do, everyone has a specialist, you know, an expertise in a specific process, and that's what your role is as a scientist, anyway, you know, in a scientific role. So those are, I think, I found some of the main differences. But what the other stuff I found working in early discovery is that actually there are quite a lot of similarities as well. We do novel science, which a lot of people don't assume happens in industry, but it does happen. I get to do a lot of capability development. I get to, you know, work with really novel technologies, look into new areas of biology, because we're now trying to identify novel targets. And then that also brings a lot of opportunities to collaborate. So I have a lot of academic collaborations outside of AstraZeneca, so within Cambridge, in Glasgow. I also have, you know, opportunities to supervise postdocs myself. So, you know, I've got postdocs working in AstraZeneca that I'm currently supervising. So yeah, there's lots of opportunities to still do that type of research, that academic research, as well as working on what you're doing in your main role.
Thanks very much. We've got one that is from James, that's for Neil and Saleha. So James says, I'm a postdoc who loves working in a lab, but doesn't like the baggage that comes with academia. Fair enough. How much room for advancement is there in a lab-based career? it often seems like to climb the ladder, one has to end up spending less and less time in the lab. So what are your experiences with this? So if you come to Neil first.
Yeah, I guess as I think one of the answers said earlier, you know, in most sort of lab-based sort of roles, there are opportunities for people to go in two different directions. And one is if you love the lab and want to stay in the lab but don't want that academic sort of group leader position, there are in industry, in certain academic labs, in our labs and things, kind of, you know, what kind of has different names. It's kind of like staff scientists or, you know, senior principal scientists or things like that, which are, you know, experts in the lab and really are there to help mentor the people as they come in, really drive to become the technology experts and things. So there is a natural career progression where you stay in the lab and just become the go-to person in the lab for lots of things, and that can be management as postdocs, PhD students if it's an academic lab, becoming the expert on certain pieces of kit or things. But equally, obviously, if you move away from the bench, there are different opportunities, and certainly within our labs, and, you know, I'm sure the same in other places, you know, they are treated as sort of equal career tracks and with equal weighting. So, you know, you value people who want to stay in the lab, you value people who want to get more into the management side. It's just different routes. So I think, again, as people said earlier, it's about choosing what you like to do and what the opportunities that really excite you. And if you want to stay in the lab, that's fantastic, because there's nothing that beats experience in the lab, and especially in drug discovery and things.
Thanks, Neil. Saleha, did you want to add anything for that one as well?
I think Neil's summarised it quite well, but I'd just like to add that you know, you can definitely progress down a scientific track if you don't want to go down that management track within industry. I mean, you could, you know, if you're thinking about progressing in a scientific track, you know, you could be managing like a scientific program within your area for the company, or even actually the scientific direction and the future scientific direction of your particular, you know, in your particular area of expertise for the entire company in AstraZeneca. So there's definitely kind of similar levels or grades, both within the scientific and the management track in industry, and probably in other organisations as well, like Neil put.
Thanks very much. Okay, let's move on. So we've got one for James, and this is from Alexandra. Alexandra asks, what kind of progression opportunities are there for you in public engagement, particularly in a university or scientific society environment?
It varies a lot, actually. So most of the sort of scientific societies tend to be relatively small, so they might have one or two different public engagement people. So not a huge amount of progression in terms of societies. I think universities will vary hugely. At Warwick, we've got a team of 6 people in the public engagement team, which is quite large for a lot of universities. Other universities might have 1 or 2, or they might be sort of dotted around the university in various faculties. So in terms of progression as a sort of a public engagement professional, I'm not sure it's a field that's, you know, got enough depth in it actually for much progression specifically. But I think within that, there are definitely sort of ways you can sort of move up the hierarchy using that experience. So, for example, my line manager is actually in charge of public engagement and sort of the regional strategy for the university as well. So that might be sort of the next step that I would take. I'd take on sort of more of a sort of a management position, look after some of the public engagement teams, but take on some other responsibilities as well. So I think, you know, there is room for progression, but it's a slightly zigzaggy sort of way up, and you tend to sort of bring in other skills and other sort of areas of expertise as you go as well.
Thanks, James. We've got one for Neil from Jonathan, who asks, how would you say the experience of being a scientist at the CRUK differs from that of being a scientist in industry?
I guess, you know, there are similarities and differences. I think obviously in terms of similarities, we work to the same rigor as industry, the same sort of high standards and things. I guess there is a little bit more flexibility in terms of the target choices, because sometimes we're seeing things a lot earlier because they're coming straight from the academics. So often you're a lot more involved in sort of perhaps some of the very early biology as it emerges from sort of some of the academic researchers we collaborate with and things like that. But I think a lot of the opportunities are very similar, because obviously we're trying to do drug discovery in the same way that sort of, and we work with pharmaceutical partners as well. So I think that there are a lot of similarities, but I would say probably in terms of the biology, it's perhaps that we get to see things a little bit earlier, because these are things that are coming from early CRUK funded research and things.
Thanks, Neil. We've got one from Alice, and this is for James and Emma. So Alice asks, when applying for science communication or public engagement or outreach roles, what tips do you have when writing a cover letter or CV to make you stand out from everyone if you do not have years of experience within these roles? So we come to Emma and then James.
So my first tip is spell check and grammar check to within an inch of its life. Because if you're trying to communicate and you can't communicate yourself appropriately in your cover letter, you're going in the bin. I would say look for buzzwords, look for keywords in the job description, look for anything that you can sort of say, I have this skill because, or I have done something similar because. And also look at the company. What does the company care about? Which if you just Google them, you'll find out. Mention why you want to work for that company. I mean, that's just general good CV cover letter writing advice, really, I think. So, but for science communication, do talk about what it is you want to communicate. Like do you recognize who their audience is? Do you understand what the role is going to entail? The worst thing is when you read a cover letter and it's an amazing applicant, but they've completely misunderstood the role. And so you just have to be like, I'm really, there's no point of us even interviewing you. So yeah, so that'd be me.
Thanks, Emma. James, you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of reiterate what I said earlier, really, about do your homework. And I think public engagement is definitely one of those areas where a lot of people do public engagement or science communication on a sort of a volunteering basis. You know, they might go along to a festival or an event and sort of do something which is fantastic and brilliant. But actually, for people who are professionals within that field, there's quite a depth of theory and sort of research actually that goes into public engagement itself. So, look at places like the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement, look at their website and do some of the reading on some of their sort of notes and their case studies. They've got their own journal, which is called Research for All, again, which is sort of, the theory behind public engagement. So make sure you're sort of up to date on some of those, the latest trends in the field, as it were, so that you know what you're talking about, you've got the right lingo and you're hitting those buzzwords, as Emma says, and you're making sure that you're sort of, even if you've not got the experience, you've actually thought about it and you know what you're talking about.
Thanks, guys. We've got two questions again that are quite similar, and I think something we haven't talked about yet. One's from Isabel and one's from Miroslava. I'll read Isabel's one out, but they're both very similar. So this is really to all of you. So for PhD students looking to graduate in the next couple of years, how are your workplaces dealing with the impact of COVID, and what do you expect recruitment to look like? So I guess this is looking kind of in the medium term, how you think your sectors will be recruiting. If we'll start with Saleha and work our way through.
Yep. So I think so. It's looking very different in the workplace at the moment. We've de-densified a lot of spaces, but actually what we're finding is everyone is being able to do their role either from home or in sites where they've been made safe. So that hasn't changed, and actually our workload has increased, mainly because AstraZeneca, as you probably heard through the media, are doing a lot of work around COVID-19 already. So then we've got vaccination programs, we've also got monoclonal antibody therapeutic programs, and we're looking into repurposing some of our medicines as well. So in that sense, there's quite a lot ongoing. And even prior to COVID, I think for AstraZeneca specifically, might not be the same for other pharmaceuticals or other companies in industry, but we've currently in a phase where we're trying to increase our portfolio. So we've got a lot of ongoing recruitment at the moment, lots of exciting science going on and lots of new capability builds. So we are heavily recruiting, and in the next few years, we expect to continue to do that.
Thanks very much. Neil.
So I guess there's sort of a practical level and another level. So on a practical level, I think we've managed to keep our labs open throughout with sort of reduced density working, people being in to do the lab work and then going home to work from home. Where your role is mainly based on sort of making calls or doing things. We're permanently working at home, so you're getting to see lots of the inside of people's houses on calls all the time. I guess similar to what Saleha just said, the part of cancer research UK that I work in, we're very much in in partnership with industry, who are still looking to invest heavily into oncology, because it's there's still a huge area of unmet need in cancer. Despite the COVID crisis, it's that's not going away. So I think that there's still a lot of opportunities. I think the broader space, obviously, in sort of funded research, will probably be challenging for a couple of years, just because of the economic situation, and we have to see how that plays out. But certainly in terms of trying to push forward therapies and getting patient benefit in oncology, I think there's still a lot of opportunities, because clearly that's not going anywhere, and we still got a lot we want to do in that space, COVID or no COVID.
Thanks, Neil. Emma.
So I think in the immediate future, so sort of the next 12 to 18 months, recruitment's going to be quite limited in publishing, just because of the fact that everything is a little bit, we're not really sure how economic changes and funding changes are therefore going to be applied to scientists with their publication costs, be that either subscription or if they want to publish open access, generally the scientists pay what's called an APC. So from a money point of view, nobody's 100% sure how the money is going to be changing because of COVID. But there are more scientists doing more science every year, which means more publications every year, which means as an industry, publishing is always growing. And I think that there will always be new opportunities, particularly as technology has forced us to accept a new normal. How many people know people who wouldn't have been caught dead on a Zoom call 6 months ago, and now they're doing it every Sunday with their nan? So you don't know, but I don't think it's going to affect publishing too much in terms of scale. It might just sort of affect it in terms of technology. Portland Press, for example, is currently recruiting for 2 new publishing roles. So during a lockdown, so yeah, I don't think it's going to be a big change. Publishing is also, it's been around for about 400 years. It's not going to change too quickly. Too drastically. Yeah.
Thanks, Emma. And James.
Yeah, it's very hard to say. I mean, universities, are struggling, and until we sort of see how many students we get in September and October time, we don't have a clear picture. So, recruitment at universities at the moment is obviously, on hold, and we sort of have to wait and see what happens a little bit. On a slightly brighter note, though, particularly at Warwick, and I'm sure this is the case at many other universities, looking at the sort of the community and the region that we sit in, we are going to be central to that regeneration and that sort of kick-starting back up the region again a little bit. So public engagement and community engagement in particular is definitely one of our priorities in the university. So we will sort of take a central role in sort of working with the local councils and the local health authorities, and sort of working with them to really sort of bring things back up to speed a little bit once we sort of start going towards a bit more of a normal again. I suppose the one thing that we are noticing at the moment, in the shorter term, is that obviously a lot of our work is events based, and obviously all events have sort of crumbled and been cancelled. So we're looking at how we can do that online and how we can be a bit more innovative and think about digital solutions and that. So there's a lot of work going towards, what does online digital public engagement look like, and how can we make that a bit more engaging? So, there's still lots of work to be done, and there's sort of new interesting avenues, I suppose, to explore. And there's a lot of people doing interesting work. So short term, lots of new work going on, and then hopefully longer term, we'll be sort of helping the universities to really make a bit of an impact in their local regions.
Thanks, James. Thanks everyone for your answers for that one. We've got one from Stuart, which is for Saleha, and it's something we haven't really talked about, which is a role as an NHS scientist. So Stuart asks, what was your experience of working as an NHS scientist? How varied is the work, and is there much room for promotion?
So yeah, absolutely. So I really enjoyed working in a hospital lab. It was very different to any other lab I've ever been in academia or industry. I think the environment is much more high pressured because I was in a pathology lab, so I was dealing with patient samples. So I'd be getting samples from the community, so from GP practices, healthcare centres, and I'd also get samples to analyse from the hospital itself. So but there's different levels of urgency in that work. So some hospital samples from A&E or ICUs need to be processed really urgently, and so some days were quite stressful, and there's a lot of samples that you'd be amazed at how many tests. But there's it's quite varied as well. So that there's like biochemistry labs, there's microbiology labs, there's transfusion labs. So there's a lot of different things you can do within a hospital lab environment. And also in terms of grades, I was doing my undergraduate degree at the time, so I came in as a laboratory assistant, but there were more senior members in the group. So there were biochemists, there were people who've trained as biomedical scientists, there were people who got their PhDs and were more senior scientists in those roles. So pretty much there is still a hierarchy even within a hospital organisation to try and progress up the ladder in those scientific roles. So you're not doing basic research, because a lot of that is done obviously in academia, but you are it's more doing analysis of patient samples in a medical setting.
Thanks very much. This time has really whizzed by. I don't think we have any more time for any more questions, although apologies, because there were loads of really good other questions that we haven't got to. So thanks very much for everyone for sending your questions in. I think we've talked about quite a few different topics. It's been really interesting. So thanks to all our attendees. Thank you so much to our panelists. So thanks James, Emma, Neil and Saleha. It's been really interesting hearing about your journeys to where you are now, and also thanks for sharing some of your top tips and experience of your varied roles. It's been really helpful. So thanks very much for your time. Just a few final comments. So we have, for anyone at various points in your career, whether you're already doing something or whether you're in university or thinking about further study, we've got lots of information on careers on the Biochemistry website. So let's come on the slide now. So our careers page, which is the first link there, we have lots of things like career profiles and advice for looking for jobs and all that kind of thing on our careers page. So I suggest to have a look there. There's lots of good resources. We also have on the Biochemist webpage. So the Biochemist is our magazine. For those of you that don't know, on the Biochemist webpage, we have some day in the life articles, which are really good. They have they're short articles where we've talked to people in all kinds of different careers that are somehow allied to molecular bioscience, and we've got a real good range there. So you can check out some of the day in the life ones just to get a feel of what it's like to actually do one of these jobs. So that's a good thing to check out. We then have our careers Twitter chats, which are quite fun. We had one on higher education jobs, and we've got one of those on working in industry. So anyone that's interested in working in industry, you can check out our next career Twitter chat. So that's the last one on the slide. Hashtag Biochem Careers, and that's on 3rd of September at 3 o'clock. So that might be worth tuning into. And as I said at the start, if in terms of this webinar series, if you've got some future ideas for future webinars, please do drop us an email and let us know. And the series is on the webinar website, which is there. So I think the computer's going to cut us off. Thanks very much to everyone for your time. Thanks to our panelists, and good luck in all your future endeavours. Thanks very much.